Molly stepped into a secret mission with one objective: uncover the truth about Nolan Bennett and the network of corruption surrounding him. To get close, she became the quiet assistant to Captain Paul Flinch, invisible by design, watching everything. Nolan noticed her, but not in the way she expected. He made her the easy target. Every meeting carried a new remark, every mistake magnified under his cold authority. Then, inside the war room, in front of officers and command staff, he humiliated her without hesitation. His words were sharp, deliberate. The room fell silent. She stood still, absorbing it, memorizing it. In that instant, the mission stopped being just professional. It became personal. What Nolan didn't know was that the woman he tried to break was already building the case that would destroy him. Stay with us, there's much more beneath the surface. And before we move forward, take a second to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's uncover how this story truly began.
Molly Stewart wore her cover identity the way she wore a uniform correctly fitted, unremarkable, absent of ornament. The laminated badge resting against her sternum read Administrative Support, Office of Captain Paul Flinch. The personnel files secured in a classified vault at Dam Neck recorded 18 years in naval special warfare, combat diver qualification, and 4 overseas deployments without mission compromise. The NCIS counterintelligence cell that had constructed her legend over 4 months existed only on paper fragments routed through black channels. For the duration of this assignment, the operational Molly Stewart had been administratively erased. 17 days inside Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek had established a rhythm. She arrived at 0645, logged into CPR, reconciled calendars, prepared briefing binders in precise order of precedence. The target was Lieutenant Commander Nolan Bennett, 50 years old, decorated, confident in the insulation of rank. 3 confidential informants and 11 procurement discrepancies indicated systematic diversion of classified equipment to a private contractor with foreign ties. Patterns, not accusations. Paper, not rumor. The Joint Operations Planning Cell convened Tuesdays and Thursdays in the war room. Access controlled. No personal electronics. Secure tablets staged and verified. Molly's duties were procedural: distribute annexes, confirm encryption keys, maintain attendance logs. She placed Bennett's coffee to his right, black, no sugar. The ceramic met the polished table without sound. She observed without appearing to observe. Bennett's pen tapped twice before he spoke. Major Dennis Carver sat at his left shoulder, spine straight, expression neutral. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Okafor reviewed her tablet with methodical focus. Molly cataloged posture, cadence, eye contact, baseline behavior against which deviation could be measured. On this Thursday, she had already captured 3 documents of interest. The camera embedded in her ID badge required only alignment and proximity. The shutter was silent, the images encrypted and queued for transmission during her 2,200 check-in window. She did not rush. Speed created anomalies. 40 minutes into the briefing, Captain Flinch requested the logistics annex. Nested 2 folders deep. She accessed it in 11 seconds, fingers moving with economical precision across the screen. Bennett looked up. A fractional pause. Stewart, is this your first time operating a computer? Or is there a more specific problem I can help you with? 9 officers at the table. A junior lieutenant at the far end lowered his gaze too quickly. The corner of his mouth tightened, suppressing something. Carver's jaw shifted once, then stilled. Okafor's eyes flicked up and back down. Found it, sir. Her tone remained even. She transferred the file to the primary display. In the attendance log, her handwriting was controlled, letters upright, spacing consistent. Beneath the table, her left hand closed into her palm until the skin over her knuckles blanched. The pulse at her wrist beat steady, measured. Inhale, 4 counts. Hold. Exhale. Bennett had already dismissed her from thought. He resumed speaking, voice calibrated for authority, outlining transfer authorities and operational contingencies. He did not look at her again. Molly studied the angle of his profile, the set of his jaw, the faint compression at the outer corner of his eye when he emphasized a point. Longevity had settled into him like armor. He occupied the room as if it were an extension of his own clearance level. She kept her gaze lowered to the tablet, recording timestamps. No reaction entered the official record. No inflection betrayed deviation from role. Administrative support. Background presence. Inside the parameters of her cover, she made a precise commitment. She would dismantle him within the bounds of federal statute and evidentiary procedure. Every requisition, every authorization chain, every deviation from procurement protocol would be documented to withstand adversarial review. No appealable error, no procedural contamination. When the meeting adjourned, chairs shifted against the floor in muted friction. Bennett left his empty cup at his right hand. She collected it last. The war room returned to silence. Molly powered down the secure tablets, verified encryption locks, and closed the door behind her. Her check-in window opened at 2,200. 40 minutes after the base fitness center closed and the parking lots thinned to a scatter of vehicles belonging to night staff and insomniacs. Molly sat in the driver's seat of her sedan with the interior lights off, the dash dimmed to its lowest setting. The device in her hand had been signal scrubbed and shielded. Its casing bore no markings, its firmware hardened against intrusion. From the outside, she was another officer lingering over email before going home. She uploaded the 3 captured images through an encrypted channel routed across layered nodes designed to fracture metadata trails. The transmission bar advanced without sound. Her jaw remained relaxed, but a small muscle near her left temple pulsed in measured intervals as she monitored packet integrity. At 2,201 to 27, a confirmation ping illuminated the screen. Received. Reyes. 90 seconds. Special Agent Dana Reyes did not waste words. The acknowledgement was procedural, but Molly held her gaze on it for a fraction longer before initiating secure deletion of the local cache. The files dissolved into blank sectors. The documents were procurement requisitions. Apartment of Defense Form 1149 variants, authorizing the transfer of 12. And PVS-31C night vision binoculars from a task force Aegis forward cache. Serialized, lot-tracked, controlled under restricted distribution. The stated destination was a logistics holding facility in Norfolk. The address, however, mapped to Meridian Tactical Solutions. Reyes's financial forensics unit had been tracing Meridian for 8 months. No payroll records, no registered employees, no active web presence, no awarded DoD contracts and FPD SNG. Yet over the previous 22 months, it had received equipment transfers totaling $2.3 million in assessed value. Molly enlarged the signature blocks on the requisitions. 2 authorizing officials required per transfer under Standing Command Directive. Bennett's signature appeared in all 3 clean, deliberate strokes, consistent pressure across the page. The second signature rotated. She reviewed the names in sequence, aligning them against her mental seating chart from the war room. 3. Officers within the task force, Aegis command structure. She recognized one immediately. Major Dennis Carver. Her thumb paused against the screen. Carver's posture came back to her in precise detail, shoulders squared, chin slightly elevated, hands folded just left of his briefing folder. He occupied the chair at Bennett's left in every session. When Bennett had directed a cutting remark toward her in prior meetings, Carver had not intervened. He had not shifted in his seat. His face had remained composed, the corners of his mouth fixed in a line that neither approved nor objected. Co-signature authority required review. Carver's name appeared too often to be incidental. She cross-referenced timestamps on the requisitions with the meeting schedule she had logged since insertion. Patterns formed in clean geometry. Transfers authorized within 48 hours of specific planning sessions. Documentation sequenced to appear routine. Carver was not peripheral. She composed an encrypted update to Reyes summarizing the dual signature pattern and requested a deeper financial pull on Carver's accounts, personal, spousal, affiliated entities. Asset disclosures, unusual wire activity, tax anomalies. The language was clinical. No adjectives. Transmissions sent. The parking lot had emptied further. A lone sodium vapor lamp flickered near the perimeter fence, casting intermittent light across the windshield. Molly powered down the device and sat without moving for several seconds, listening to the muted tick of the cooling engine. Back in her apartment, she filled a kettle and set it on the stove. The ignition clicked, flame blooming blue beneath steel. She removed her lanyard and placed it precisely on the counter, parallel to the edge. Steam rose. She poured water over a tea bag and watched the color diffuse into the cup. She did not drink it. At the kitchen table, she opened the notebook containing every logged interaction since her insertion, dates, times, verbatim exchanges. Bennett's phrasing cataloged. Carver's silences noted. Okafor's measured interjections recorded without commentary. Her pen hovered briefly before adding a new line referencing the requisition signatures. The ink settled into the paper with steady pressure. There was a third name among the rotating authorizations she did not yet recognize. The unfamiliarity registered as a narrow tightening at the back of her throat. She wrote it down carefully, copying the spelling exactly as it appeared. She would identify the pattern attached to it. The tea cooled untouched beside her hand. The third signature on the requisitions resolved into a name. Molly recognized the moment Reyes transmitted the confirmation. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Okafor. Molly's eyes remained on the screen, but her body went motionless, as if stillness could hold the information at a manageable distance. The glow from the device reflected faintly along her cheekbone. She read the name again, verifying spelling, rank, command alignment. No clerical error, no misattribution. Okafor was 38, one of 3 female officers within the Task Force Aegis command structure. Her record, as far as Molly had observed, reflected procedural rigor and measured authority. In meetings, Okafor spoke rarely and with specificity. When she referenced doctrine, she cited chapter and paragraph without consulting her tablet. There had been small moments. During a prolonged planning session 2 weeks prior, Molly's coffee cup had sat empty near the edge of the war room table. Without interrupting the operational discussion, Okafor had reached for the thermal carafe and refilled it, a quiet gesture executed without comment or acknowledgement. On another occasion, when Bennett's tone toward Molly had sharpened beyond necessity, Okafor had intervened, not by confronting him directly, but by redirecting the exchange. "Sir, for clarity of record," she had said evenly, the administrative timeline complied with the standing guidance. The correction had been procedural, not personal. Bennett had moved on. The room had exhaled. Molly had logged both instances. In the margin of her notes, she had marked Okafor as a potential ally, possibly a future source. Now her signature appeared on 4 of the 11 suspect requisitions. She leaned back in her chair, fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table. Her breathing remained controlled, but a faint tightening drew across the back of her shoulders. She closed her eyes for a single measured inhale, then opened them and returned to the data. Emotion was documented, not indulged. She created a new entry in her operational log. Subject Okafor, Sarah. Signature frequency for 11th flagged requisitions. She overlaid the timeline of Okafor's authorizations against the broader transfer pattern. A gap emerged. 14 consecutive months during which Okafor's name did not appear on any suspect documentation. Then the signatures resumed. Reyes transmitted a supplementary financial analysis minutes later. A flagged wire transfer from an offshore account routing, obfuscated through layered intermediaries, into a personal account associated with Okafor's mother. The timing aligned precisely with the end of the 14-month gap. Medical notes were not included in the file, but the designation was clear: oncology treatment at a private facility in Maryland. High cost. Insurance sensitive. Molly's jaw set almost imperceptibly. She enlarged the transaction summary, examining amounts, dates, account holders. The offshore origin did not correlate to any declared family asset. The pattern required no conjecture. Okafor had not initiated the scheme. Her signature reappeared after the transfer. The leverage point was temporal and financial. Coercion. The distinction carried weight under federal statute. It shaped charging decisions, plea negotiations, sentencing exposure. It also altered the operational calculus. Molly stared at Okafor's name for several seconds longer than necessary. The memory of that refilled coffee flickered across her mind and was set aside with deliberate precision. She drafted her assessment to Reyes in formal language. Probability high that Lee TCMDR. Okafor entered participation under duress linked to third-party medical financial pressure. Recommend approach as potential cooperating witness rather than co-defendant. Early cooperation increases prosecutorial leverage and evidentiary value. Her finger hovered over the send icon for a fraction of a second, then pressed. The reply arrived within the hour. Approved. Proceed with caution. Molly placed the device face down on the table. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. She flexed her left hand once, releasing residual tension from the tendons, then closed it again, steady. Approaching Okafor would require proximity without suspicion. No abrupt change in pattern. No deviation that could alert Bennett or Carver. The contact had to appear incidental, organic, defensible if scrutinized. She reviewed the war room schedule. 3 days until the next joint planning session. 3 days to construct access without breaking cover. Molly rose from the table and walked to the window. Outside, the parking lot lights cast long, sterile lines across the pavement. She stood there for a moment, hands resting loosely at her sides, eyes focused on nothing in particular. Then she returned to her desk and began mapping routine movements within the Command Building Fitness Center hours. Corridor traffic flow, locker placement, operational planning applied to trust. Molly did not approach Lieutenant Commander Sarah Okafor inside the command building. Corridors carried sound. Eyes tracked deviations. Anything abrupt would register. She manufactured proximity instead. The base fitness center closed at 2100. Okafor's routine was precise. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1930, treadmill row 3, second unit from the window. 40 minutes at a consistent pace. Headphones in place, tablet balanced on the side tray, screen angled slightly left. She did not deviate. Molly began arriving in 1940. 2 machines over, same incline, similar pace, 6 consecutive sessions. She did not initiate conversation. She did not glance longer than necessary to avoid collision or misstep. Her breathing remained even, footfalls measured against the moving belt. Peripheral vision catalogued without fixation. Okafor's stride was efficient, shoulders relaxed, gaze forward. They existed within the same narrow band of space, repeatedly, without explanation required. Shared environment, shared silence. On the 7th session, the tablet shifted. The belt vibration nudged it toward the edge of the tray. It slid, tipped. Molly's hand moved before the device cleared the frame. Fingers closed around the casing inches above the rubberized flooring. Okafor removed one earbud. A single strand of hair clung to her temple with perspiration. "Thank you. No problem." Their eyes met for less than a second. Molly handed the tablet back without comment and returned her focus to the digital readout in front of her. Heart rate steady, no acceleration. The following Tuesday, as Molly stepped onto her machine, Okafor inclined her head slightly. "Good evening." "Evening, ma'am." 2 sessions later, during cooldown, Okafor mentioned a scheduling adjustment to the Thursday War Room briefing. Molly responded with the updated time and acknowledged receipt. The exchange was procedural, unremarkable. The familiarity accumulated by repetition, not disclosure. On Friday afternoon, Molly entered the fitness center locker area during the narrow interval between peak use and closing. Uniform jackets hung on the open rack outside the shower corridor, name tapes aligned. She identified Okafor's by touch and sight. From her pocket, she removed a folded square of paper. 4 words. 1 time. "I know about Meridian. 2100. She slid the note into the interior pocket and left without altering pace. At 20:55, Molly was seated in her vehicle in the east parking lot. Engine off, windows up. The sodium vapor lights cast flat illumination across empty spaces. Her real credentials rested in the center console, accessible but concealed. At 21:03, Okafor approached. She did not hesitate at the passenger door. She opened it, entered, and closed it with controlled force. The scent of detergent and faint antiseptic lingered from the locker room showers. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The dashboard clock advanced by 1 minute. Okafor turned slightly. "Who are you?" Molly reached into the console and withdrew the badge. Naval Special Warfare. NCIS Joint Investigation Unit. Her real name. Her rank. She held it steady between them. Okafor studied it without blinking. Her pupils constricted under the overhead light. When she finally lifted her gaze, her eyes were dry. The muscle along her jaw tightened, released, tightened again. "How much do you have?" "Enough to close it," Molly said. "More with you." Okafor looked forward through the windshield at the dark lot beyond the hood. Her hands rested on her thighs, fingers splayed flat against the fabric as if grounding herself. "He told me if I didn't sign, my mother's treatment would be..." The sentence fractured. She swallowed, started again. "He has contacts at the insurance board. He made it very clear what he could do." Molly did not interrupt. Her breathing remained controlled, gaze steady. "I know." Silence settled inside the vehicle. A distant engine turned over somewhere across the lot. "I kept copies," Okafor said. The words were low, deliberate, of everything. "I didn't know what to do with them, but I kept them." A small release moved through Molly's chest, barely perceptible. The evidence chain would solidify. Documentation independent of her own captures. "Tell me where they are." Okafor's eyes shifted back to her, calculation visible in the brief narrowing of her brow. Then she nodded once. Okafor's copies were stored on an encrypted drive concealed inside a hollowed-out technical manual on the shelf above her desk. The manual's spine was creased from use, its cover annotated in pen along the margins, mundane, forgettable. The concealment was precise, almost elegant. Molly registered the craftsmanship without admiration. The circumstances nullified it. The drive contained 47 files. Scanned procurement requisitions bearing Task Force Aegis letterhead. Internal email chains with routing metadata intact. A single audio recording, compressed audio only. In it, Bennett's voice was unmistakable. Measured cadence, low register, controlled. He instructed Carver to backdate a transfer authorization to align with an already executed shipment. The phrasing was careful, but the directive was explicit. Adjust the date to reflect prior approval. No ambiguity. No hesitation. Molly listened to the recording once through studio-grade headphones, elbows braced on her kitchen table, fingers interlaced so tightly the knuckles blanched. She replayed the final 10 seconds. Carver's brief acknowledgement. The faint scrape of a chair. End of file. That night, she transmitted the entire archive to Special Agent Dana Reyes through the same signal scrub device protocol. The upload bar advanced in incremental blocks. She watched it without blinking. The response arrived at 0400, case elevated. Federal prosecutor assigned. Do not move on subjects. Continue collection. She read the message twice, committing each clause to memory. Her jaw tightened at the hinge, a small muscle ticking once beneath her left eye. She deleted the message in accordance with protocol and powered down the device. Federal involvement altered the operational calculus. Elevation meant presentation to a grand jury. It meant subpoenas, sworn testimony, evidentiary hearings. Chain of custody would be dissected by defense counsel trained to identify procedural fractures. Every photographed requisition required authentication. Every transmission log would need verification through digital forensics. Every interaction with Okafor would be subject to cross-examination designed to imply coercion or fabrication. Molly understood the implication with clinical clarity. She could not deviate. She could not provoke. She could not signal awareness. She had to remain embedded. The next morning, she arrived at headquarters at 0630. She prepared Bennett's coffee black, no sugar, placing the mug at the precise angle he preferred on the corner of his desk. When he entered the war room, Major Dennis Carver at his left as always, Molly stood by the display console awaiting instruction. Bennett reviewed briefing slides she had compiled from raw intelligence summaries. Halfway through, he paused. His thumb tapped once against the folder's edge. "Your formatting is inconsistent," he said without looking at her. Molly stepped forward, spine straight, hands clasped behind her back. "I'll correct it, sir." Carver's expression did not shift. He sat with forearms resting on the table, fingers laced, gaze fixed ahead. The fluorescent lighting reflected off the polished surface, cutting a sharp line across his cheekbone. He did not intervene. He never did. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. Bennett's conduct adhered to a predictable rhythm: public condescension during operational briefs, a comment about the adequacy of her administrative throughput, a calculated correction delivered in front of a visiting officer from another command, voice calibrated to carry just far enough. Molly felt the weight of eyes on her as she acknowledged the critique. Her breathing remained even. She made a notation afterward: date, time, location, witnesses, direct quotation. Each entry was formatted identically, objective, verifiable. She did not record the sensation that followed these exchanges, the tightening across her sternum, the faint, metallic taste at the back of her throat. Those details were irrelevant to prosecutorial standards. At her apartment, she continued to review the evidentiary index Reyes had acknowledged. 47 files. 1 recorded instruction to falsify authorization dates. Multiple requisitions bearing dual signatures. Bennett and rotating officers within the task force Aegis command structure. Carver's name among them. She maintained eye contact in meetings. She absorbed the barbs without visible reaction. Her posture never faltered. The record was expanding, structured, corroborated, durable. One day, in a federal courtroom governed by the federal rules of evidence, that record would be read into the transcript. Nolan Bennett would sit within earshot, and every documented word would be articulated under oath. Molly closed her notebook, aligning its edges precisely with the table. 5 weeks into the elevated case, the transmission from Special Agent Dana Reyes arrived flagged urgent. Molly read it once, then again, her thumb pressing harder against the screen with each line. Bennett had a buyer. The equipment transfers to Meridian Tactical Solutions were not the terminal point. Meridian was a staging vehicle and intermediary constructed to absorb scrutiny. The diverted ANSI PVs-31C monoculars and associated materiel had been routed onward to a private security firm operating in 3 countries. 2 of those countries were under active United States arms embargo. Molly set the device down with deliberate care. Her pulse registered in her throat, steady but pronounced. The scope recalibrated instantly in her mind. This was no longer an internal procurement fraud or a violation of fiscal controls under DOD acquisition regulations. It was a multi-year export pipeline moving controlled military equipment into embargoed jurisdictions. Potential violations of the Arms Export Control Act, federal conspiracy statutes, material support exposure. The architecture Bennett had constructed extended beyond personal enrichment. It was infrastructure. The federal prosecutor arrived 48 hours later. Claire Ashford flew in from Washington and met Molly and Reyes in a secure off-base facility cleared for sensitive prosecutorial briefings. Ashford's suit was dark, unadorned, her hair pulled back without ornament. A legal pad lay centered before her, pen aligned parallel to its margin. She did not waste language. "I need clarity on 3 points," she said, folding her hands. "Witness reliability, document chain integrity, direct knowledge." Molly sat opposite her, posture erect, palms resting flat against her thighs beneath the table. Reyes occupied the adjacent chair, silent. "Petty Officer Okafor?" Ashford asked. "Her access was legitimate," Molly replied. "She preserved original metadata, no alterations. Her retention method indicates intent to document, not fabricate." Ashford's eyes held on her for a beat longer than conversationally necessary. "Chain of custody?" Photographed documents were transmitted via encrypted device, time-stamped, logged, no third-party handling. A single nod, and the third, Ashford continued. "Can you confirm that Bennett knew the equipment was moving beyond Meridian?" There it was. Molly inhaled through her nose, controlled, silent. Her jaw tightened briefly before she answered. "Not yet." The admission hung in the air, unsoftened. Ashford did not react visibly. "We require demonstrable knowledge. Email traffic. Written authorization, recorded verbal acknowledgement. Without that, defense counsel will argue he believed Meridian was the endpoint." Molly's fingers curled slightly against the fabric of her trousers, nails pressing into her palm. She released the tension before it reached her face. "I understand," she said. Ashford regarded her across the table. "How close are you to him operationally?" Molly met her gaze without wavering. "Close enough." The meeting adjourned without ceremony. No reassurances, no projections. She drove back to base in the early morning hours. The roads were empty, sodium vapor lights casting intermittent bands of amber across the windshield. Her reflections surfaced and disappeared with each passing pole, steady, mouth set in a neutral line. In her mind, the audio recording replayed. Bennett's voice, even and unhurried, instructing Carver to backdate a transfer authorization. No coded language. No visible concern. Authority had settled into him like a permanent uniform. In meetings, he corrected subordinates with an economy of words that implied permanence. He no longer scanned rooms for threat vectors. He assumed control as a constant. Careful operators left no seams. Bennett had stopped looking for seams. At the next war room briefing, she stood within arm's reach of him while he reviewed operational logistics. The faint scent of coffee. The crisp slide of paper against paper. Carver at his left, impassive, hands folded. Molly observed without appearing to observe the cadence of Bennett's speech, the casual references to supply movements, the absence of caution when discussing Meridian as routine throughput. She did not need him reckless, she needed him consistent. Consistency over time became evidence. Her breathing remained even as she collected her notes. Bennett dismissed her with a short nod, already turning to Carver. She stepped out of the room, expression unchanged. Nolan Bennett had not been careful in years. She required only one verifiable moment in which that carelessness crossed the threshold into record. Molly did not manufacture the opportunity. She understood operational discipline too well to force an error into existence. Pressure distorted outcomes. It introduced variables. Instead, she maintained routine, cadence, predictability. She allowed Bennett the comfort of his own habits. It took 9 days. The logistics review was placed on the Thursday calendar as part of a standard compliance cycle initiated by Captain Flinch. The audit parameters were legitimate. Reconciliation of forward cash inventory. Verification of serial numbers. Confirmation of transfer authorizations under standard and emergency operational authority. The review was administrative in origin, procedural in tone, and unrelated to the investigation. Its scope, however, intersected precisely with the transfers Bennett had supervised. Molly prepared the briefing folders with her usual exactness. Tabbed sections. Annotated summaries. Section 3 contained aggregated inventory totals cross-referenced against transfer logs. She aligned each page edge before securing the binder clips. With authorization from Claire Ashford and technical assistance from an NCIS audio specialist, she wore a recording device embedded within the lanyard she had carried since her first day in the unit. The casing had been modified without altering weight distribution. The microphone aperture was invisible unless examined at inches. She had worn it before during lower priority exchanges. This time, her pulse registered faintly at the base of her throat as she clipped it into place. Before the meeting convened, Bennett intercepted her in the corridor outside the war room. The hallway lighting cast sharp angles along the cinderblock walls. His expression was neutral, almost conversational. That neutrality carried its own directive. The inventory figures in Section 3, he said, lowering his voice just enough to create intimacy without secrecy. I need the totals reconciled before Flinch sees them. Molly held her tablet against her chest, fingers resting along its edge. Reconciled, sir? Some of the numbers don't account for equipment transferred under emergency operational authority. His gaze settled on her, steady, appraising. You understand what I'm saying? Her jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before she answered. You want the Section 3 totals adjusted to reflect the EOA transfers. A pause, not long, but deliberate. I want them accurate, he replied. The word landed with careful emphasis. Accurate means complete. The corridor was silent except for the faint hum of ventilation. Molly felt her fingertips press harder into the tablet casing, then relax. I'll take care of it, she said. His eyes searched her face for resistance and found none. He gave a single nod and returned to the war room, shoulders squared, stride measured. Molly remained where she was for one controlled breath. The recording device rested lightly against her sternum. She could feel its presence without touching it. He had not used the word alter. He had not referenced concealment. He had framed the directive as administrative correction. But the inventory under emergency operational authority did not align with documented authorizations. Adjusting totals would collapse the discrepancy Captain Flinch's audit was designed to identify. He had just requested modification of official inventory documentation in anticipation of compliance review. She entered the war room without haste. Major Dennis Carver occupied his customary seat at Bennett's left, hands folded, expression composed. Bennett did not look at her as she distributed the folders. Captain Flinch reviewed the agenda at the head of the table. Molly took her chair near the door. Her posture remained upright, shoulders relaxed, pen aligned parallel to her notepad. When Section 3 arose for discussion, she did not speak until addressed. The totals remained as originally compiled. No adjustments, no reconciliations beyond documented transfers. Bennett's gaze shifted briefly toward her, almost imperceptibly. a tightening at the corner of his mouth. Then it was gone. She met his look without defiance, without apology. The trap had not required fabrication. It required accuracy. The arrests were scheduled for a Friday. Claire Ashford coordinated the timing with NCIS, the Naval Inspector General's office, and the Department of Justice. Arrest warrants were issued for Nolan Bennett, Major Dennis Carver, and 2 civilian contractors formerly linked to Meridian Tactical Solutions. Petty Officer Okafor had entered into a written cooperation agreement 3 days earlier, executed under prosecutorial supervision. Molly was not given the exact hour of execution. Operational security required compartmentalization. She was instructed to report as usual, maintain behavioral baseline, and await a specific text message from Special Agent Dana Reyes before altering posture. She arrived at 0650. The building smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and burned coffee. She moved through her routine without deviation, brewed Bennett's coffee black, arranged the Thursday read-aheads in precise order of agenda, aligned the folders so their edges were flush with the table's grain, placed his cup to the right of his primary binder. Her movements were economical, no wasted motion. At 0718, 6 NCIS special agents and 2 United States Marshals entered the command building. The sound of measured footfalls preceded them down the corridor, synchronized, deliberate. Conversation inside the war room thinned, then stopped entirely as the door opened. Molly was standing at the AV station, one hand resting lightly against the control panel. Bennett looked up first. For a fraction of a second, barely perceptible, the muscles along his jaw flexed. His eyes sharpened, calculating. In that narrow space before recognition fully settled, there was something unguarded. Then the expression flattened, controlled, professional. He had rehearsed this possibility. He believed rehearsal was protection. The lead NCIS agent stepped forward and identified himself. The warrant was produced. The language was formal, procedural, stripped of tone. Around the table, officers remained seated, backs rigid, hands folded or frozen mid-gesture. Major Carver sat to Bennett's left as always. The color drained from his face in increments, leaving a gray cast along his cheekbones. A small muscle beneath his right eye fluttered once, then again before stilling. Bennett's gaze moved methodically from the agents to the marshals, to the door, assessing exit vectors that no longer existed. Finally, his eyes settled on Molly. They held there. She did not shift her weight, did not lower her gaze. Her expression remained neutral, almost clinical. The lanyard rested against her collarbone, inert now. A marshal began the Miranda advisement in a voice calibrated by repetition. Bennett listened without interruption. When instructed, he turned and placed his hands behind his back. The steel cuffs closed with a muted, metallic click. He did not protest, did not argue jurisdiction. His shoulders remained squared, chin level, yet the stillness carried weight, like a structure bracing under stress fractures invisible to the surface. Across the table, Carver swallowed. His hands, previously folded, separated slightly before he forced them still. When the agents addressed him, he rose more slowly than Bennett had. The tendons in his neck stood out as he clenched his jaw. Captain Flinch remained standing at the head of the table. His eyes moved from the agents to Bennett, then to Molly. The room had gone silent except for the faint hum of the ventilation system. Molly stepped away from the AV station. She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket and withdrew her credentials. The leather wallet opened with a soft crease. She placed it on the table in front of Captain Flinch. Naval Special Warfare, NCIS Joint Investigation Unit. Her legal name, her rank, her photograph. Flinch looked down at the badge. His hand hovered over it but did not touch. His throat shifted as he swallowed. "How long?" he asked, voice lower than usual. 61 days, she replied. No inflection, no embellishment. Behind her, the agents escorted Bennett and Carver toward the door. Bennett did not look back again. The demolition had been controlled, structured, documented. Nothing about it was loud. The federal grand jury returned an indictment spanning 44 counts. The document was methodical in its construction conspiracy to defraud the United States, violations of the Arms Export Control Act, unlawful transfer of defense articles, obstruction, false statements. Buried within the count structure were two additional charges that had not been contemplated at the outset of the investigation. Wire fraud tied to a contract manipulation that predated the Meridian pipeline by 6 years. Reyes's financial forensics team had uncovered it while tracing a secondary account thread, an ancillary ledger movement that did not reconcile with declared procurement flows. The discovery was incidental, only in origin. Its implications widened the timeline of criminal exposure significantly. Nolan Bennett's attorney entered a plea of not guilty. The trial lasted 11 days. The courtroom was controlled, climate-regulated, acoustically muted. Every word carried. On the fourth day of testimony, Molly took the stand. She wore her service uniform, ribbons aligned, Naval Special Warfare insignia secured above her heart. The trident rested against fabric that bore 18 years of documented service. She sat upright, hands folded lightly in her lap until sworn. Claire Ashford approached the lectern without flourish. Her questions were structured chronologically: assignment, insertion, documentation protocols, observed conduct. Molly answered in measured cadence. She did not elaborate beyond scope. She did not compress what required clarity. She described the procurement requisitions, the dual signatures, the irregularities in transfer destinations, the corridor outside the war room. "What did Colonel Bennett say to you?" Ashford asked. Molly's gaze remained steady. "He instructed me to reconcile Section 3 inventory totals to account for equipment transferred under emergency operational authority." Did the documented authorizations support those totals? No. The recording was admitted and played in full. Bennett's voice filled the courtroom, calm even, controlled. "I want them accurate. Accurate means complete. There was no distortion in the audio, no ambiguity in tone. Defense counsel objected foundation, scope, alleged procedural violation. Each objection was addressed, each overruled. The federal warrant authorizing the recording had been secured in advance. Chain of custody had been documented from device deployment to forensic extraction. Molly did not look at Bennett while the recording played. When cross-examination began, the defense attempted to suggest interpretive misunderstanding that reconciliation could imply. Administrative clarification rather than falsification. Molly responded without visible strain. "The documented totals were accurate as written," she said. "Adjusting them would have created a false representation of inventory status. No embellishment, no accusation, just fact." On the 8th day, Petty Officer Okafor testified. She took the stand without notes. Her hands rested flat against the witness rail, fingers spread slightly as if grounding herself against the polished wood. Her voice did not rise or fracture. It remained clear. She described the first phone call, Bennett's voice informing her what would happen to her mother's medical treatment if she refused to sign transfer authorizations. The phrasing had been indirect but unmistakable. Access to care, insurance approvals, administrative delays. She described the second call, the reminder. She described 14 months of adding her signature to documents she knew were fraudulent because she had calculated the alternative. A public hospital ward. Appeals denied. A system influenced by a man whose professional network extended into procurement, contracting, medical logistics. The courtroom remained silent as she spoke. Even the shuffle of paper ceased. When she finished, she exhaled once through her nose and folded her hands together. The defense's anticipated pivot centered on the recording in the corridor, an argument that it violated secure communications protocols within a command facility and should therefore be suppressed. Ashford addressed it directly in rebuttal. The recording had been executed under federal warrant authority. The location did not negate the authorization. No classified communications were intercepted. The protocol cited by the defense was inapplicable to the facts and evidence. The argument dissipated under statutory language. Bennett sat at counsel table throughout, posture composed, hands resting near a legal pad he did not use. His expression did not fracture. Yet the stillness around him felt altered, as if the architecture he had relied upon had shifted incrementally out of alignment. For years, he had constructed a system calibrated to absorb scrutiny, layered authorizations, distributed signatures, intermediary entities. He had not accounted for sustained observation, for documentation that accumulated without confrontation, for patience. The record now existed independent of him. Nolan Bennett was convicted on 31 of 45 counts. The verdict was read without inflection, each count enumerated, each finding entered into the record. Bennett stood as required, hands resting lightly on the edge of the defense table. His expression remained composed, but the muscle along his jaw tightened incrementally with each guilty finding, a faint pulse visible beneath the skin. Sentencing followed weeks later. 22 years at a federal correctional institution. Retirement benefits forfeited under statutory mandate. His Bronze Star administratively revoked after formal review. His name removed from the command building's commendation board in a brief internal procedure that required a maintenance worker, a screwdriver, and less than 10 minutes. No press attended. No statement was issued. The empty space on the board was rectangular and precise. Dennis Carver entered a guilty plea prior to trial. The plea agreement reduced his sentencing exposure in exchange for cooperation. He delivered his allocution in a low voice, eyes fixed forward. The two civilian contractors associated with Meridian Tactical Solutions each received federal prison terms under separate proceedings. Sarah Okafor received a formal letter of censure and was administratively separated from service. The consequence had been outlined in the cooperation agreement she signed. She did not contest it. On the morning her separation orders were processed, the air outside the administrative building was sharp with cold. Molly waited near the entrance, hands in the pockets of her coat. Okafor emerged carrying a small cardboard box containing personal effects. For a moment they stood facing each other, breath visible in the air between them. Neither reached for ceremony. "What you did in that courtroom," Molly said, her voice even, "required more courage than most operations I've been part of." Okafor's eyes held hers. A single nod. No visible tremor. She adjusted her grip on the box and walked toward the parking lot without looking back. Molly remained where she was until the sound of the engine faded. She returned to Dam Neck 2 weeks after the verdict. The debrief lasted 3 days. NCI's review board members asked about operational methodology, evidence handling, warrant compliance, informant management. She answered with the same precision that had carried her through testimony. Documentation was examined. Audio files authenticated. Timeline corroborated. The board found no procedural violations in her conduct. The federal prosecutor's office submitted a formal commendation to her chain of command. Captain Flinch, in a written statement included in the review packet, noted that she had maintained her cover with a professionalism that was, in retrospect, remarkable. Molly read the sentence once. Her expression did not change. She closed the folder and aligned it with the edge of her desk. Recognition had not been the objective. For 61 days she had carried a single, controlled image: Nolan Bennett seated in a federal courtroom, hearing his own voice replayed in open session, hearing the instruction he believed was insulated by rank and habit, understanding, without distortion, that the individual who had sat 3 feet from him twice a week, who had delivered his coffee, who had absorbed correction without visible reaction, had documented him with exacting patience. She had not allowed that image to bleed into her conduct. It had remained contained, like a slow burn beneath steel. It fueled discipline, not impulse. On the afternoon she cleared her final paperwork, she drove home along the coastal road. The Atlantic lay beyond the tree line, unseen but present. Salt edged the air. The windows were down, wind moving through the vehicle in steady currents. There was no surge of triumph, no outward release. There was the absence of residue. The case file was closed, the record intact. The system had held. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. Her breathing was even. She felt clean. That was enough. If you value stories grounded in discipline, consequence, and quiet resolve, subscribe to the channel.